Welcome to another episode of the All In Podcast with Nate Peo. Again, I'm your host, Nate Peo. Today's guest is somebody I'm super excited to have on the show. It's Taj Ahmad-Eldridge, Senior Director of Investment at LACY. That's the LA Clean Tech Incubator. What they're doing, if you're not familiar with the startup world, is they're taking companies that are new, they're in their beginnings, and helping to develop their idea, develop their product, and get it out to the market with a specific focus in clean tech. So that's really environmental stuff, whether it's solar, water, power, all kinds of stuff. It's super exciting program. The LACY Clean Tech Incubator is a super awesome building with tons of cool people running around, a lot of ideas, a lot of creativity. And Taj is the Senior Director of Investment there, so he's pretty much connected with all these great companies and trying to get them connected out into the world. So I hope you like this episode. I think he brings a lot of value, a lot of knowledge. He has a quote, "Talent is universal, opportunity is not." He's trying to change that. Not everybody starts with the same starting line. But we all have talents. We all have unique abilities. We want to get the most out of that. So hope you enjoy the show. As always, if you could subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, that would be great. And if you found value in this show, please tell at least 2 people who also might find value in the show to check it out. Anyways, with further ado, here's Taj.
Want to go far in business and in life? You can't do it alone. The secret is expanding your network of personal relationships, building friendships, connecting on an intimate level, away from the office, over a coffee or cocktail. Welcome to All In with Nate Peo, the show that asks what happens when you go all in and leverage the power of your network of personal relationships.
Welcome to the All In Podcast with Nate Peo. I am your host, Nate Peo. I'm joined today with an amazing guy, Taj Ahmad-Eldridge. He is the Director of Investments at the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator in downtown Los Angeles. Welcome to the show, Taj. How are you?
Hey, Nate. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing fantastic. So I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but I'd like to, give the listeners a chance to know who you are. So for me, I had this interest probably about 3 years ago. We, met because I was interested in getting plugged into angel investing and actually working in the startup tech world. I thought to myself, like, hey, I like startups. I wanted to do something myself in the entrepreneurial space, but at the time, I didn't feel like I had the resources or like the time commitment to do it, and I really didn't have an idea. And I definitely wasn't really looking forward to putting in the long hours for minimal pay being a founding startup. So I thought to myself, how could I get involved in startup world in a different level? And I thought, I'd like to do angel investing, but I don't know anything about it. So how could I learn the ropes when I don't know anything about it? So I thought a little bit harder about it. And I was like, what would be the best way is to donate my time and learn, by being around it. So I thought, how do you get plugged into a startup ecosystem you know nothing about and being able to help startup businesses function and get involved that way? So I had used a book that recently been given to me by a friend called Digital Persuasion. And it's a really cool book that talks about how you can connect with people online in a positive way where you're not just bombarding them with shitty sales messages. So it talks about making personal, useful relationships. So I started kind of like practicing, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna use this method to kind of get plugged into the startup world. So I started looking at people like, who are the people that would know startup founders? I was like, well, incubators would be. Where are incubators located? I don't even know anything about them other than they're like hot stuff in Silicon Valley. So I started Googling and doing them on LinkedIn. And then I came across your profile, and you happened to share an alma mater at Pepperdine with me. And I was like, there's a personal connection. Now I just got to craft a nice email. And I sent one over and said, hey, I wanted to get plugged in. And you're like, hey, come down to this pitch contest. I think it was like that week, maybe the next day or something like that. So I came down to where you were at the time, was in UC Riverside. And there was a pitch contest going on, and I went and sat into it. So that was my introduction to you. And from there, you got me plugged into some companies, which led to some other companies. And so, I got to thank you for those introductions. But how does one like yourself get plugged into startup world and be involved with incubators? I think that'd be a unique story to tell your journey of how you arrived at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember the email very well because I responded with, I'm a class of '03 and a nice 14 Darius Shiraz would be the great wine that you mentioned. Yes. So that's definitely works with it. There's a quote from Warren Buffett that says, invest in what you know. I add to that and I say no more. And I think that's how I kind of have my life about relationships and contacts. I think little things like that, like you sending that email and referencing both the school that we both attended and wine, and knowing I had an interest in that was what made me respond quicker, because I think I responded relatively soon after that email.
Really quick.
And I think that's so that you definitely build a network. For me, I think I kind of got into the startup world by happenstance. I started my career actually when I went to school. I was a poetry major, literature major. I tell this story a lot because I think it's important, because people always say, you have your graduate degrees in economics and you're economist. But, when I was young, I was one of those young people who did not want to study the same thing that my parents studied. And I thought I wanted to be a musician. So I figured if I'm going to be a rapper, I need to study poetry. And so I went there. But what I later learned is, after graduating and working in the banking industry, I learned that exposure to literature, that exposure to poetry was very important, because it taught me about storytelling. And it taught me that the sale is more than just a sale. It's a way to take a person on a journey. You're taking them on a journey to figure out what they need. And for me, I can definitely say my interest into the startup world actually started while I was in banking, and I was working for Wells Fargo. And I'm thankful for Wells Fargo for being one of the more forward, innovative banks, because they had a team led by a phenomenal guy named Steve Ellis, who started the first mobile banking platforms, the first really kind of fintech exposure back in the early 2000s. And I was thankful to be on one of those teams during the process. And that really kind of opened my eyes to Silicon Valley and the startup arena. And from that, it's always had an interest for me. And that's where a lot of my initial contacts came from. And so it really kind of started there. I stayed into the finance and stayed into banking some years after, going to UBS Investment Bank, and then TRW Investments, which was a private equity hedge fund. But my true start came after that time, where I invested in a company and was kind of angel investing, startup investing.
That's an interesting path, because most people, they get out of college and they're not quite sure what they want to do. And you go into banking, but it kind of sets the groundwork. You don't realize it at first that the people you work with are hey, these are my work friends. And then I have my own college friends, I have my own personal friends, and I keep work and personal separate. But those are the friendships you forge early that kind of shape up. And as you're rising through your career, you never know who those people are going to go, what places are going to be, but they tend to kind of as you go up in your career, they go up in their career. And they become the resources and the connections you have to reach out to down the road. But those are people you're not always expecting them to be. So one thing I always try to tell people, especially young kids not young kids, but younger people that are starting off in their careers, is get out there and develop those connections in your industry, because these are the people you're going to rise up in your career with. And the more people you know, the more relationships you can build. The sooner you do it, you're going to have a bigger network as you get older, and it's going to come together. So that's pretty cool that you went down that path.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a firm believer in everyone has a story, everyone has a value. I remember even when working at the bank, I used to tell my colleagues, when we worked in corporate banking, that you should even know the tellers, because you never know what a person's path may be, especially in this country where there's so much opportunity. And I think that's one of the things I've kept throughout my lifetime is that I always treat people with respect. I think that's the other thing too that I love, that I kind of took with me from being from Texas, is this idea of being of the Southern hospitality. And I think that that's something that really kind of gave me this give first attitude. And I've always tried to provide value first, because I think that that's something that I see a lot of people just take. And I think that giving is something that becomes out of the ordinary that people tend to not see.
Yeah, sometimes I think the bar is a lot lower than people think with regards to that. Like, because I grew up in Nebraska, I grew up Midwest, so I have a little different take on the California hustle and bustle lifestyle, which I'm sure you do too. But like holding the door open for somebody, or writing a handwritten thank you card, or calling somebody to say thanks, or you're thinking of them. Sometimes like you think like, oh, everybody does that, and then you realize a lot of people don't. And when you do something as small as that may seem, it does make a lasting impact on people's. They remember that stuff. So
yeah,
I always say,
absolutely,
write a handwritten thank you note. So your career path took you to, I guess, leaving the angel investing area or the VC world, and you got more hands-on with the incubator side. How was that transition for you, moving into like being on the?
Yeah, well, I can say, it's funny when I have to tell this story, because I think that it's important to show my thought process in it. The way that I even got to California from Texas was that I was working at the Bank in Texas at the time. And one day on a Thursday, I just kind of woke up and I said, I had a map on my wall. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to toss this dart, and wherever it lands. At that time, Wells Fargo was on the West Coast. And I was like, wherever it lands on the West Coast, that's where I'm moving to. It landed in Vegas, no lie. The next day, I told my roommate. How
close did that dart really land to Las Vegas? It was prom, or
the folks from Vegas will understand. It landed in Henderson, but Henderson was closer to Vegas, to where I was like, okay, Vegas, there we go.
Okay, close enough.
Yeah, close enough. But I literally told my roommate, and I said, look, I'm headed to Vegas. This was 1998. We packed up the car, and at the time that consisted of a TV and clothing. And the next day, I was on the road, and my roommate couldn't go. Another guy that went to school with us went with me, who had to go to California to see his fiance. And so we were in the car, pre-cell phones for us. I stopped in Arizona to pick up to try to get an apartment, and as soon as I landed there, and made it to Vegas the next day, driving out I-40 towards North Las Vegas, and that sense of risk taking, that sense of just kind of believing in a gut feeling, I think has permeated my whole being and what I've been doing. So I tell that story to say that this idea for risk and the idea for kind of believing in things early on was one of the ways I invested. And even from a standpoint of when I was in the started angel investing and started kind of getting involved with companies, I actually quit my job believing that, hey, it's great company, is going to work out, and it did not. But that was an interesting time for me, because it taught me a lot of things about what not to do. And I think people tend to forget that, especially people of color, failure becomes things that we want to run away from, or we don't want to participate in. We don't see any value. But my first two companies I was part of as a founder failed miserably, and I learned so much from that. As an operator and as an investor. And I think I'm so grateful for those opportunities that came with that.
Yeah, there's something to be said about failing. Like, nobody wants to go through it. Everybody wants to be successful their first time, but people that have been through failure know that that's what shaped them. You don't learn as much when things are going successful. A lot of times it's just like luck of the draw, and your contributions, because everything's going so well, you think like, hey, I'm just, nailing out of the park. And it's really just, we're kind of along for the ride. But when you're going through really challenging times, working for projects or companies that aren't successful, you learn to be a lot more resourceful to try to make do with what you have. But then at the end of the day, you look back on those problems, and you can kind of say, hey, well, this is where my mindset was and why it failed. And if I did it again, I would have done it this way different. And you apply those lessons and you move forward with it. So,
Yeah. So throughout that, the way that I got towards the incubator route was, after those few failures, I was lucky enough to be involved with a few companies that did pretty well in the apparel space, in the mobile marketing space, in the political space. And one of the last startups I was working with, we ended up getting money from a company called Wine Direct, and we were essentially the food network for wine. We're focusing on really kind of helping wineries expand what they were doing, expand their sales through a myriad of ways, through content, partnering with things like Amazon. And what people tend to forget is that wine is an agriculture product. They're farmers, and these farmers have farming issues within water, within soil, and all this sort of stuff. And so that made me start thinking about ag tech and water issues. And I was having a conversation with some folks at UC Riverside, which is a huge university that focuses on ag tech and it focuses on water issues. And it was just serendipity. And they were saying, hey, we're going to start an incubation program here. We want to really kind of focus on commercialization of startup companies. And one of the deans there, Mike Bazzani, he's like, hey, you want to be involved. I like what you're doing with wine. I like your mentality that you're focused on wine with. And, will you come here? The irony of it was that I spent my career living in the Inland Empire area because it reminded me so much of Texas. And my spouse is the educator in the region. And I was flying up and back and forth to San Francisco, staying in LA for work, and then coming home on the weekends. And so I really kind of jumped at it because it was an opportunity for me to actually live and work in the county that I actually lived in. So that's what kind of brought me to UC Riverside.
Yeah, that's an amazing path. And I think what it showcases is like everything that you went through is like becomes a part of you, and it's like unique to you in the way, like you said, you tell your story, but like how you transfer those lessons on to the companies you had from being in Texas to and the way you're raised with the Southern hospitality to being in a field poetry that had, from the looks of it, nothing that would take you down the path you went to, working in a bank, moving to Las Vegas out of the blue. Those are all things that like shape you who you are. And I think people forget too, like in 1998, I don't really remember being an entrepreneur was thought of as like being a super rock star. Like maybe you're like some nerd that knew how to program computers, but it wasn't something people, at least for the people I was around, wanted to do like it is now, where everybody's like, hey, I'm gonna be invent the next Facebook. I'm gonna invent the next Instagram. And that's, a long shot. That's like becoming, a professional athlete and being a superstar, a rock star on the court. And it's just like, It's one thing to just make it into the big leagues. It's even another one to be a superstar. But you've taken a path. I think what I was really impressed when I started going down to UC Riverside is the ideas that the students had, or the people in the incubator. They're not all students, but a lot of them had some great ideas, and they're working on challenging the assumptions they think a lot of the status quo has, but also being given back to the communities that they're working in, and being disruptors to less glamorous industries with ag, with transportation. And now that you're at LA Clean Tech Incubator, you've made basically clean tech really, popular and kind of like you're taking like a cool vibe on it. So. Yeah. We jokingly say we want to bring sexy back to clean tech. We were, I used to talk about all the time that at the end of the day, when we're talking about storytelling, and when we're talking about building this sense of building a story around what you do, people have to be concerned about it. Even me, like my venture into clean tech wasn't one. I wasn't an environmentalist all my life. I wasn't focusing on that. But when I got into start around the community with the farmers and realizing that climate change has a much succinct, a more specific impact than what I normally hear.
a lot of times when we think about climate change, when we think about clean tech, when we think about environmentalism, they talk about from a very broad scale about, saving the world, or about we have only this much time to live, about saving the animals and things like that. But no one really talks about the aspect of clean tech and the aspect of climate change when it hurts an individual. We have individuals who jobs are directly impacted by it, or you have individuals who might have asthma that's impacted by combustible, vehicles that are non-electric that are providing this smoke and particulates in the air. So I think for me, that's where it really kind of hit home. And when I was in apparel, we did this thing with influencers. We had like people like LeBron James and other athletes who were wearing our clothing, and I noticed how people really gravitated to that idea of the celebrity influencer. And I realized also what was interesting is that the idea of celebrity changed, right? Because you could have somebody who didn't play basketball, who did not act, but couldn't become a celebrity by the sheer use of social media and the sheer popularity of it. And so, that's one thing that I think the clean tech really has to figure out is how do you really kind of build these celebrities? And I think, people like Elon Musk have realized that. He's done it. He's figured that out. And the interesting thing is that people don't even equate Tesla as a clean tech company, even though they're building electric cars that are reducing emissions. And I think it's telling to show how most companies are really figuring out this clean tech role to be identified not as a clean tech company, but as a company of what they're really disrupting. So as an example, there's a company that both of you and I know that's in the clean tech space that's charging these. There's an infrastructure company charging these cars, and they don't identify themselves as a clean tech company, but rather an energy or infrastructure company that's just there for the connection of these vehicles to the consumers.
Yeah, it's a definitely impressive how you've put this spin to bring the sexy to clean tech. Because when my first job in California, I was working for a company that built water treatment plants. So we'd go down to LADWP or whatever jurisdiction was very like it, and you'd go to these old buildings that were built in the 40s, and they're very stuffy. There's a lot of bureaucracy, and there's a lot of they just don't flow smoothly. And then you invited me down to go down to LA Clean Tech, and you walk in, and it feels like you could be in like the LinkedIn campus or somewhere else where like it's attracting, creativity and ideas. And you're bringing other ideas, not to answer for you, but I know that you guys have set aside money for art and investment in, stuff that's not traditionally thought of as like, hey, this is something we need to incubate as artists and creators in some capacity that doesn't provide like an immediate like return on investment that can't be, calculated in terms of dollars and cents sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a whole idea about really kind of changing the perception of clean tech. And also, too, I think it's an idea that the city wanted to do, and LADWP. I have to give credit to LADWP, who are participants in that, and also Deborah Sacco, who's the director of that art program at Lacey. And I think what they wanted to do was take the history of Southern California and the history of that region that we're in is called the Arts District. And so they wanted to ensure that we pay homage to what was there. And I think those are, given that we're in an area we're surrounded by galleries, it made perfect sense to have that there too. And to really kind of express that.
Well, it's definitely an exciting place. So this is a show about personal connections. So we kind of breezed over a little bit of your transition from UC Riverside to Lacey. Obviously, you didn't just get in your car and throw the dart at the map and say, I'm moving to LA and I'm gonna head up this this incubator here. How did you end up where you're at, and how did the value of the personal relationships you've connected and made over the course of your career play a part in that role?
Yeah, well, I think for me is that one of the things I can definitely say, I read a lot from books to magazines to articles to what have you. So It's almost like a PhD level of consumption of knowledge, and sometimes that's a situation that benefits me because you have a lot of different talking points to have with people. I was also fortunate to study abroad in a few places like Chile and Hong Kong and Portugal. And so that kind of gave me a wide array of a network that I really kind of leaned on. And then also, too, I know that these groups get a bad rap in tech, but not all frat boys are bad. I was in a fraternity, and I think that's provided a lot of context with me as well, because a lot of my fraternity brothers are in the venture capital space as well. So I definitely lean on them for support and advice. But ironically, my pathway to Lacey was by this investor named Tracy Gray, Miss Tracy Gray. She's a Black female investor raising $100 million fund. And we connected on some different, I think some areas we were talking about engineering or space or something like that. She worked in NASA. And I had this fascination with NASA ever since the Challenger back when I was young. And she had an event at Lacey, and we talked for a bit. And that was my first visit there. And had a good conversation with the co-founder of Lacey. His name is Neil Anderson. And we talked about my vision, what I see for the region. And we really connected on the idea that clean tech can be different. A lot of the failures that traditional tech had in diversity for not only people of color, but for women and for certain communities. We talked about clean tech as an opportunity to really kind of to correct those ills. About what traditional tech did. So that's how we really connected there. And ironically, there was a position open for a director for investments. And for me, that was important because access to capital was a very important thing for founders. And it's a very important because I remember being a founder. I remember the need for access to capital. One of the things I was most proud of in Riverside was that we were part of the team to bring a fund out to the Inland Empire. I think one of the first true venture funds that are out there at $10 million. And so for me, being able to have access to capital to provide to founders, to give them that fuel, was important enough for me to make that transition from Riverside to Lacey.
Yeah, that's a clear example of like you never know where those people you meet are going to play a role in the path in your life, and they brought you over there. Now you touched a bit on diversity, and it goes back to another thing you talked about was when you were in the banking world, you were like, hey, you got to know the tellers, and maybe the diversity of knowing the tellers isn't necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
It's really you need lots of ideas and if you're just like a homogenous representation of, the same people, we all look the same, we all went to the same school, we all have basically the same shared beliefs. If you don't bring in people from a different background, a different way of growing up, a different way of living, different experiences, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities and a lot of ideas that you wouldn't have necessarily thought of.
Absolutely. When I talk about diversity, I definitely think that there's a need for gender and racial diversity, but there's so many different other classes of that we tend to forget. I talk about intellectual diversity, people who believe in certain things or different things, even from a political standpoint. And we talk about diversity of class, even that standpoint, even though I was a corporate banker, I still made friends and had time to connect with the tellers because they had value that I saw. And I think benefited me later on down the line. And I think that's where a lot of people miss out on. They assume a person's value instead of assessing their value by having a relationship with them, because you never know what their other person's trajectory would be in the future, or what their value or their purpose is. And so for me, that's why it's always been like to really have a connection with everyone that I meet. And it pays back. It pays back forward too. And I think people see the sincerity when I meet people and I'm asking about where they come from, or we have these long conversations about what they do. And I always say that, I will greatly deposit 30 minutes of my time to meet someone because the return can be so much more in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So you're getting a lot of companies that come to you Obviously, not all of them can make it into the program, and then you have companies that are new to the program. A lot of the guys and gals have ideas, or they have concepts, but they might be lacking a network of people to advocate for their idea. How do you give these teams these guidance of like, hey, go out and build a network? What do you recommend for them to do to build this up and find people that can tell their story and find advocacy for them and sponsor them to other people? Not sponsor like financially, but hey, if something comes up, I'm always going to be thinking of you to tell somebody about you and sharing the word.
Yeah, I think there's for me, there's a cheat for that. I've always been one to want to partner and not really want to be a solo founder, because I think being a solo founder is so difficult because there's so many parts of the business that you would have to do. And so thusly, when I was a founder and when I had a partner, my job was always to be out there and to just meet as many people as possible and to ensure that there was a connection that could be made in the future while the other partner will be running the business and we're kind of handling the day to day. And I think when you start thinking about fundraising, you start thinking about those relationships, there's two approaches you can take. There's some people who believe that in having a shotgun approach, very specific, wide net you're casting, and there's some people who believe in a sniper approach. They only want to talk to investors that are in this space. They only want to talk to people that are in the space. Every company that I've been in, we've taken a little bit of other types of industries to move forward. So as an example, the clothing company that we was a part of, we took a lot of our focus and a lot of things we did from the automotive industry, having conversations within the automotive world. From the wine company I was in, we took a lot of emphasis from the music industry and kind of see how the music industry did their artists and learn from that. And that's what really differentiated us from a lot of different companies. So for me, I differ from a lot of other folks where I feel like there's time enough in the day to build those relationships, especially when you have a team around you. And you really kind of have one person that focuses on building that team and building those relationships. And I think now more than ever, there's so many different types of organizations and websites and meetup groups and opportunities that are out there that make it advantageous for people to have those relationships built. I think also that's what separates Southern California from Northern California. I think that there's always something going on. There's always an event. There's always kind of an openness to the events to welcome people to. And I think that helps in the transition of the ecosystem.
Yeah, there definitely is. Like right after, I start getting plugged in with you, it starts opening doors or conversations to other people. And their simplest stuff is like, hey, where do you guys hang out? And people say, oh, go find meetup groups. And then you find a meetup group and it takes you, to some random pop-up bar in Culver City, and you go down there and you're meeting all kinds of other people that are in startup space. You start learning about, development companies and you're constantly getting introduced to more people. You go down this wormhole and you're meeting more and more people. And when you can start looking at like, who do I know in my network that I could connect this person to? Who would be good people to meet and then make introductions to? And then all of a sudden, like those relationships grow and add. So it's definitely, you're right. There's a lot to do in LA and a lot going on and tons of people. So it's easy to go from digital to in real life in that aspect.
Yeah, and I think the exciting part about that is that it's not just LA; it's the whole of Southern California too. Because I think that same type of ecosystem is happening in Orange County, in San Diego, in Riverside County, and Glendale, and Pasadena. And I think that's exciting to me, because people are realizing that you don't have to just go to Silicon Valley all the time to create this ecosystem. You have the talent, you have the funding, you have the ecosystem right here at home. And I think that's more exciting to me. I really think that, even though at Lacey, focused on your vehicles to reduce emissions, I think the real reduction of emissions will be when people can work closer to their homes. So where they live, when they work can be one and the same. And I think that's going to be the real transition that we'll see.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. So I think you've shared a ton of knowledge on building connections, especially in the startup world, which I would say is don't be limited to just that immediate industry, but get outside your comfort zone and try to meet as many people as you can. But you also have another passion. I guess it's not really a passion, but another topic that you want to talk about, which is kidney disease. And so I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that, what people can get to know, and how they can help with getting involved.
Yeah, well, I look at that as another way to really connect with people, right? Because I think that, a lot of times when we go to networking events, the first questions I hear from people mouth is, "What do you do?" I think that's an easy, more lazier way. I tend to ask things like, "What's your theme song?" And so I ask that, or I ask some interesting things about the movies that they like or where they've traveled to, but to try to get to know the person behind the job, because that's where you make that connection. And I think that question for me, when people ask me about my theme song or talk about one that's changed within the last year, it's called Reborn by a group called Kids See Ghosts. About 2 years ago, when I made the transition to Lacey, I was diagnosed with a genetic disease called FSGS, which is a rare genetic disease that impacts the kidneys. It immediately causes kidney failure. You immediately need a kidney disease. And I talk about it a lot because it's a disease that doesn't get a lot of press. But the reason I talk about that too is that when we talk about diversity and we talk about this thing, again, more than just gender, more than just racial diversity, there are people with chronic illnesses and chronic diseases, people with disabilities that don't have that don't get connected into our ecosystem. And that's one of the things we have to deal with. And I think that that's really an interesting thing with it as well. But I think that this disease actually has been a benefit for me because it enabled me to really kind of slow down and really kind of value a lot of relationships that I have and really hone in on my purpose. And I think that for me, that's been really important to ensure that the next generation of founders have it better than I had it, and they have a quicker pathway towards innovation. So that's been one of the benefits of really kind of having this illness that I think has really kind of provided a sense of purpose. But I think podcasts like this are really important because we drive a lot in Southern California, so that enables us a lot of time to consume a lot of information. And, hopefully these are tips and tools people can get from this podcast about ways to really kind of expand their personal relationships and network.
Yeah, I would agree. I think podcasting is, it's getting a resurgence, and it's a way, especially if you're a founder or a startup company, is to get your story in front of more people. And to share what you're talking about and make other resources and other connections, because usually people kind of travel in the same circles and they trade connections, and they'll introduce you to one person who might introduce you to another who leads you down the path of the right person you need to know at the right time. So I think you're onto something there too. Before we finish up, you're getting a lot of people, again, you get a lot of people asking for your time, a lot of people asking to be a part of the group you're doing. And you're also, again, you're making impacts in the clean tech space for the environment, for the world. You're going to help impact people's lives on a big scale, but also I think giving back to the communities that you're in and bringing in people from the areas like in Riverside County and San Bernardino County a chance to build businesses and give back to their communities. You're also making micro impacts on families and communities too. So what is your number one recommendation you would tell people that are thinking, hey, I want to get into the startup space, and how do I get plugged in, and what should I be doing?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that question has come out a lot, and there's a few people that I know that's been trying to answer that question, because they're like, okay, like if I came to Southern California tomorrow from another city, another country, how do I get plugged in? Like, what are some of the things that tell me where to go? And I think that there are a few organizations that have really been beneficial to help with that. The first one is the Alliance for SoCal Innovation. I think they're a really great group. They call themselves the NATO of the region. And I think for them, you can kind of know what's in the different nodes of all of Southern California, from LA to Orange County to San Bernardino to Riverside, and they can really kind of plug a person in to what's the best focus that they're in. So if you're focusing on med tech, they would kind of tell you to go down to Orange County. If you're focusing on water or ag tech. They would tell you to go to Riverside or green tech, downtown LA, and consumer in Silicon Beach. So I think that's kind of the first primary. And then there's another site called startup.co that was started by a bunch of professionals in Los Angeles. And what they said was, look, let's just put all of these resources in one page, both video content, written content, blog, experts. I'm on it. A few other people are on it as well. And we lend our time to Slack whenever we have some free time and just post some information on Slack to help founders get started and give them a pathway. So I think that's a really good, cool tool to utilize from it as well. And I also think that the good thing about the region is there are a lot of people here that give, right? There are a lot of VCs, like people I can mention, like Austin Clements, who used to be at 10110, who now has his own fund. He does a lot of talk in the ecosystem. He's always out at events and speaking to founders and helping them to kind of get the information that they need. To Mickey Reynolds, who runs this organization called Bravery 110. She's always out there kind of giving her all to all the founders. So there are a lot of people like that who give effortlessly and freely to the ecosystem because we want to see it grow. We want to see it build. We want to see it to where Southern California is a place that people want to be in and their dreams are achieved. And people have a good quality of life that's here, and it comes from the founders. I think people here is less about just being, just making a gang of money. I think it's more about making a difference for not only their community, but the people around them as well.
For sure. And I think the people are also really proud of the communities that they're from, and they want to see those communities be successful. They're not looking to, run off to Silicon Valley and start up a business. They want to do it right here. They want to make a difference. They want to put the SoCal on the map, and particularly their counties and their city they're from. And I think there's a lot to be said when they can do that. It provides a lot of value to the communities to have big business take off. So you dropped a lot of knowledge there, and you dropped a lot of resources. So I'll have to get all those links for you and share them in the show notes. But if anybody wants to get connected to you, find out more about you, what do you recommend that they look for?
Yeah, well, I'm a true believer in the power of social media. Similar to the way that you and I connected, I'm always there. So on LinkedIn, you can find me there, Taj Ahmad-Eldridge on LinkedIn. I post a lot of information there. I like to read a lot, and once I finish reading, I share with my audience. And so, I think that's a really great place to do it. I'm also on Twitter, and a lot of us really kind of communicate there. A lot of the information that we try to put out and really kind of help founders who are in clean tech that may not be in clean tech as well. So we posted there also.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and my Twitter handle is economist, ECONOAHMAD.
Yep, that's it. There's always a good post there from you. So cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking with me and sharing your message with my audience, and look forward to having you back and seeing you around Lacey campus. And I need to get back down there. It's been a little while since I've been. It's always exciting to go see all this stuff and see how all the creative ideas flowing. So thanks a whole lot.
Absolutely. If I leave your audience with one sentence for people to think about, is that everyone has value. If we go into every relationship to realize that everyone has value, there'll be value attained from those relationships. So thank you so much, Nate. It's been a pleasure.
That's a great ending statement. Thank you so much.
Make sure to visit our website, therealnatepeo.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, so you'll never miss an episode of All In. While you're at it, if you found value, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if simply tell 2 friends about the show. Looking to connect? You can find Nate Peo on LinkedIn or Instagram.